time for us to check back in with Watermelon Hill and see what happens next. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. And if you'd like to buy this wonderful book, please visit watermelonhillbook.com. And that link will also be in the description. King of the Roost. We always had some chickens on the farm, usually 20 to 40 to supply eggs and to have for Sunday dinner when company was coming. They were not much trouble. All we had to do was feed and water them each day. They would go into the chicken house instinctively at dusk to roost. Once in the late 50s, when there was an almost total solar eclipse, the chickens thought it was night and went to roost at about 2 p.m. They were probably confused when the night lasted less than an hour. Even if we hadn't needed the chickens for eggs, it was nice just to hear the roosters crowing to announce each new day. I now have a cell phone with the ringtone set as a rooster crow. It makes me smile every time I hear it. We usually kept 2 or 3 guinea fowls because Mom and Dad said they just liked to hear them. They made a loud cackling sound when they got excited, so they were pretty good watchdogs, too. Being the smallest animals on the farm, the chickens were the most vulnerable to predators, so occasionally one would fall victim to a hawk, or a fox, or George Riggs' dogs. Once some animal dug a hole under the door of the chicken house, it only had a dirt floor, and killed every chicken we had. We found some brown fur on the bottom of the door and suspected that it was the work of a weasel, or maybe more than one. They had eaten very little, but had just gone on a killing frenzy. This only happened once. Usually we would lose only one at a time. During the day, the chickens had the freedom to roam wherever they wanted. They were not fenced in, and though they usually did not get very far from the barn, they loved to scratch around in fresh plowed ground for worms or fields that were already harvested for corn that was left on the ground. Once when I was about 7 or 8 years old, Mom, my brother Jack, and I were the only ones at home. Jack and Mom were in the house, and I was out front just daydreaming, looking down the hill over a cornfield that had already been harvested. I noticed a few chickens scratching for leftover corn. When I realized that there was a fox trying to kill one of the chickens, he was hugging the ground behind a corn row that gave a little cover as he crept up on the hen. Trying not to make any sudden moves or loud noises to scare him off, I slid into the house and said, "Jack, get the rifle. There's a fox out there." Jack immediately grabbed the .22 rifle that was always kept behind the door from the living room to the kitchen, slapped a few shells into it, and came out to the front yard. As soon as I alerted Jack, I came back out to watch the action, and by the time Jack came with the rifle, the fox had attacked the hen and was trying to carry her off. Jack was raising the rifle to try to get off a shot when we all got a surprise. I think the most surprised of all was the fox. Along with the hens in the field was our old white leghorn rooster. When he saw one of his hens being carried off, he jumped in the air and came down spurs first, attacking the fox. Of course, he was no match for the fox, but he didn't aim to give up his hen without a fight. When the fox felt the attack of a very angry rooster, he dropped the hen and whirled around to deal with his adversary. At the first lunge, the fox got a mouthful of tail feathers for his trouble. About that time, Jack fired a shot into the air. He didn't want to shoot the rooster by accident and thought he might be able to scare the fox off before he killed the rooster. It worked. The fox hightailed it for the woods, leaving the dead hen and the rooster behind. Well, when that fox took off, the rooster thought he had won the fight. He stretched up to his full height, flapped his wings, and crowed as loud as he could. He strutted all around and crowed, telling all the other hens that he would protect them from those sneaky foxes. After that, the rooster seemed to strut around the barnyard with more pride than he had in the past, even though he only had one tail feather left. I think it was sort of like his medal for heroism. Life on the farm. Growing up on a farm in eastern Kentucky in the 40s and 50s meant a lot of work for the entire family, but it was also a much simpler time. Without television and not a lot of radio, there was time in the evenings to do other things such as play games or read. I believe families should do more of that today. Most of the time in the evenings, Mom and Dad would be working on some project. Mom might have been crocheting a doily or mending clothes or working on making a quilt, while Dad may have been repairing a piece of the horse's harness or a pair of shoes on the last. This was a steel pedestal about 18 inches high, made so that different sizes of steel forms for shoes could be mounted on it. Along with his other talents, Dad was an amateur cobbler. I had to work on the farm, but I had it easier than my older brothers and sisters growing up. By that time, Dad was working at plastering more regularly and farming less. Then after we sold the horses when I was 12, we did no farming at all unless it could be done by hand. Every spring we would pay someone to come with either a team of horses or a tractor to plow the garden and potato patch. From then on, we did all the tilling with a hand-pushed garden plow or with a hoe. We always had someone to cut the hay from the fields around the house for whatever we could get out of it, just to make the place look better and decrease the fire hazard, but our farming was finished. While my brother Jack was still in high school, he started an FFA project of growing watermelons. How appropriate, right? We always grew watermelons and would take wagon loads of them over to the highway to sell, but never on a large scale. Jack had visions of making a lot of money on his project, so he planted 484 hills of melons, mostly watermelons, but also muskmelons and cantaloupes. Before the melon vines had barely started to grow, Jack had an opportunity to go to Ohio and work the summer with our older brother, making decent money, so he took it. I was the only kid left at home, so I inherited the care of the melon patch. I was about 9 at the time, and those 484 hills might as well have been 1,000,000. They seemed to stretch for miles. As the vines grew, I had to keep the weeds cut out and cultivate them with a hoe without cutting the vines. Not an easy job, but I knew I had to do it carefully or catch the wrath of my dad, which I certainly did not want. It was pretty much a constant job until the melons matured. By the time I got through, it was time to start back at the beginning again. At that age, getting up on a summer morning meant putting on a pair of pants or shorts and nothing else. I never wore shoes the entire summer unless we went to town. My feet were so tough I've stepped on one of Dad's cigarettes to put it out with very little discomfort. But the melon tending was in the hottest part of the summer, and dirt in an open field gets unbelievably hot. After a while, when I could stand it no longer, I would dig a shallow hole with my hoe to where the dirt was cooler and stand in it for a minute until my feet cooled a little. Why didn't I wear shoes? You've got to be kidding. It was hot, but not that hot. The melons came out good, but Dad was working regularly at his plastering job, and without Jack there to sell them, most of them went to waste. We ate all we wanted, gave them away to the neighbors and visiting relatives, sold a few, but 484 hills makes a lot of watermelons. Going barefoot, though comfortable, did have its hazards. The most frequent was just stepping in a fresh cow pile and having it squish up between your toes. That was so common it was hardly noticeable. Just wipe your feet off in some grass or weeds and you're good to go. Sawbriars were always snagging my ankles and keeping them shredded. Once in a while there would be a painful stone bruise and always the chance of cutting your foot on a piece of glass or tin or sticking a nail in it. But to get around all that, I would have had to wear shoes, and to a kid on a farm, it just wasn't worth it. There was always plenty of chores to do, keeping a supply of stove wood split, stacked, and carried into the house as needed, hauling in coal for the winter for the fireplaces, drawing water out of the well, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, tending the garden, etc. If some company was coming and we were going to have a chicken dinner, there was a chicken to be killed and cleaned. I didn't like that job, but the fried chicken was worth it. Mom and Dad sometimes wrung the chicken's neck to remove the head, but I couldn't do that. I would usually shoot it in the head with the .22 rifle, then cut the head off. That was much easier than chasing it down. The worst part was picking the feathers off. We would dip the chicken in boiling water to loosen the feathers, then pluck them. Wet, hot chicken feathers smell bad. If a chicken dinner wasn't such a rare thing, it might have ruined my appetite. All of the farm jobs were just work, without much enjoyment, but there was one thing as a young child that I dearly loved to do. It wasn't a job, but a privilege and something Dad only let me do if he was in a good mood. Riding the drag. I guess I better explain. When preparing a field for planting, it is first plowed with a turning plow to dig deep beneath the surface and plow the grass and weeds under so they can help fertilize the soil. Then we would go over it with a disc harrow to chop it up finer. Finally, Dad would go over it with a drag to break up the clods of dirt and leave it fine and smooth and ready for planting. A drag was usually triangular in shape with 2 or 3 logs on the bottom and some heavy planks on top connecting them. The point of the triangle was hitched to the horses, dragging the wider part at the back. The drag was built to be heavy so as to break up the clods. The weight of a young boy didn't mean much one way or the other, so I always asked to be allowed to ride it. It was the nearest thing to an amusement park ride I would get for many years. It was great. Even on flat ground it was fun, but the best was on the hillsides we farmed. There were always some rocks to bounce over, so sometimes it was a regular bucking bronco. It was really a little dangerous for a kid. If I had been bounced forward, the drag would probably have killed me as it ran over me. But they let me do it. Kids weren't protected as much on a farm, and in those days, as they are today. At one time, our farm must have been an Indian camp of some sort. Often when the fields were plowed, we would unearth arrowheads, some broken, some near perfect, but undeniably arrowheads. We also plowed up some very unusual rocks. They varied in size from a tennis ball to a medium melon and were hollow. The surface was a tan color and looked like it had been hot, then rolled in small pebbles, partially coating it. Breaking it open revealed an uneven but smooth inner surface of a dark copper color with some loose clay inside. The clay was sometimes in pellet form, but was easily crushed between your fingers to a powder consistency. When we shook the rocks, we could hear the clay rattle inside. I've never seen these rocks any other place, and as a child, I know I broke dozens of them. We gave away many to visitors who never failed to be fascinated by them. All I have today are a couple of small specimens. The best we have been able to discover is that they were some sort of geodes but contained a clay-like substance instead of crystals. We grew a wide variety of crops, fruits and vegetables, even a patch of peanuts a few times, and once in a while a patch of popcorn. When it was ripe, we would shell all the corn off the cob and seal it up in glass jars to keep weevils out of it. While I was in high school, I grew the last patch of popcorn grown on our farm. It was an unusually healthy crop and provided enough popcorn for the family's use for over 5 years, as well as giving away a good bit of it. Life on the farm, like all of life, was a mixture of good and bad, but I think as the years have gone by, we have all tended to shove the bad back to the back shelf and fondly remember the good. I think that is as it should be. Holidays were special on the farm, as they are to children everywhere. Christmas, of course, was the most anticipated holiday, but I knew not to have any unrealistic expectations because I knew they could not come true. Some kids would probably say, why were they so special if you knew you weren't going to get much? It may sound corny, but it really was not about how much we got. It was the anticipation and dreaming about it that was so great. I would spend hours looking through the Christmas catalogs, picking out what I would most like to have, even if I knew I would not get it. It was an escape into a dream world where anything was possible. My favorite dream present was a Lionel train set. They were very popular in the 40s and 50s, and I was fascinated by them. In my imagination, I would build the ultimate train set with mountains, rivers, crossroads, tunnels, signals, scenery, 2 or 3 trains, stations, cars, all being controlled by me at an elaborate console, sending trains puffing smoke and speeding around the tracks, narrowly averting accidents by split-second timing. Sorry, I think I just took a detour back to my childhood. Anyway, I knew I would never get a train set, but it sure was fun dreaming about it. Probably about as much fun as actually having one, because reality could not possibly have lived up to my dreams. High on my list also were erector sets and bicycles, neither of which I expected to get or ever did get, but that didn't stop me from dreaming about them. The most realistic of my dreams was probably a new gun and holster set. On Saturdays, I would have shootouts with some of the neighbor kids with our cap pistols, and after we got a television, watch Western theater in the afternoon. They played all the old Westerns, my personal favorite being Lash LaRue, the hero who dressed all in black and always carried a bullwhip. We usually didn't play cowboys and Indians. We played good guys and bad guys. We would ride our pretend horses and have pretend fights, which sometimes got out of hand and become real ones. Sometimes we would even rig up a shoulder holster we could wear under a coat and play detective and crook. We played a lot of pretend games with guns, but never carried the pretend games over to real life. We were all very familiar with real guns and would never have considered pointing one of them at another person, much less pulling the trigger. Our games were just games, nothing more. In the weeks before Christmas, Santa Claus was on the radio every afternoon reading letters from good little boys and girls about what they wanted for Christmas. I wrote one or two, but by the time I could write, I was having serious doubts about the old fat man. I just didn't want to miss any bases, just in case. Most of the gifts I received were from my older brothers and sisters after they moved away from home and had families of their own. I remember one very special Christmas that my big brother Lawrence came home with what looked to me like a huge box stuffed with presents for everyone. I don't recall what they were, just that I was overwhelmed. I'd never seen so many presents before in my life. Even if no one came home, I still always got something, but not much and usually not what I wanted. Listen up, kids. Here is an important lesson. Do not peek at your presents. Once before Christmas, I found my present, yes, that was singular, where it was hidden under a bed upstairs. I tried not to look, but as the days went by little, I succumbed to temptation and gradually worked the tape loose until I could get a peek. Big disappointment. Instead of the countless things I'd hoped it would be, it was what I should have known it was in the first place, a very practical flannel shirt. No matter if there were presents or not, there was always plenty of delicious things to eat. Mom made cakes, pies, several different kinds of candy, and we always had a special meal. Christmas was usually the only time of the year when we had oranges, so we always looked forward to that, too. The tree always came from our farm and was usually a cedar. We had plenty of them, so we could pick out a perfectly shaped one of any size, and they made the house smell wonderful. In my earliest memories of Christmas trees, all of the decorations were homemade. We made garlands of paper loops glued together, strung popcorn on thread, made various ornaments to hang, and covered a cardboard star with tinfoil for the top of the tree. One year, my brother Curtis and his family came home for Christmas and brought the first store-bought ornaments we ever had. There were even lights shaped like candles filled with liquid that bubbled after they warmed up. Those lights lasted for probably 20 years. Good luck finding lights now that last that long. Next to Christmas, Thanksgiving was the most anticipated holiday, and the food and desserts were at least as good as Christmas, if not better. We usually had more company for Thanksgiving, as the older kids usually like to spend Christmas at their own homes with their families. So Mom went to extra pains to make the food special on Thanksgiving. A long-standing tradition in my family was for the men and boys who were old enough to go hunting on Thanksgiving morning while the women folk prepared the feast. I know how that must sound to today's women, but back then it was considered the norm by both men and women. Besides, there were usually enough women in the kitchen that they were glad to get us out from underfoot. I was overjoyed when I was finally considered old enough to go hunting with the men instead of having to stay behind with the women. We would usually come back with a few rabbits and quail, but like so many things in life, the trip itself was more important than the actual results. One such hunt in particular was very memorable. This particular Thanksgiving, it was unusually cold and even more unusual, snowing. We always got snow in Kentucky, but rarely by Thanksgiving. A couple of my brothers had come home, so along with Dad, we all got our shotguns, stuffed our pockets with shells, and started out around the farm. With the cold and snow, all the rabbits were under cover, but that just meant we had to kick them out, and they would always be close enough for a shot since they didn't run until the last second. That certainly didn't mean it was like a shooting gallery, though. With all the snow blowing around, we missed more than we hit. The quail were sitting tight too, and would give us heart attacks when they flushed right under our feet. Speaking of feet, we nearly got frostbite. Before we finished, our feet were so numb it was like walking on wooden stumps. All in all, it was a great hunting trip. We got some rabbits and quail, but the best part was when we got home. Imagine after tramping all over the farm in the cold and snow, coming into the nice warm house and being welcomed with all the delicious aromas of a Thanksgiving dinner. It was so wonderful it almost made us forget the painful pins and needles as our feet warmed up. Mom had really outdone herself this time. I practically stuffed myself into a coma, but before I could take a nap, I had to go back out in the cold again and clean the rabbits. All things considered, it was one of my all-time greatest Thanksgivings. Love those memories from Dale. Love the memories of his families and those wonderful Christmas and Thanksgiving memories and the things he talks about. He is right. Of course, today lots of people get way more than one present, and Christmas should be about what it's really for. The meaning behind the season, the reason for the season, they say. But you can't help it when you're a kid. Think about the presents and think about the food and stuff. But Dale is so right about thinking about that anticipation. So often the anticipation is the fun thing in life. Even if it's maybe dreaming about a vacation, where would I get to go, and planning the trip and thinking about all the stuff, that's as much fun as actually getting to go on the trip. And as he said, sometimes it's more fun if maybe the trip doesn't go like you had it planned. That was the most fun. And I remember dreaming about those things about Christmas too. And of course I got more than Dale did, but not compared to today's world. And I didn't always get the things that I wanted. But when I did, because I didn't get much stuff through the year, if I did ask for a certain baby doll or something, it was just such an exciting time, when you're young. I remember one year Paul and I got a bicycle for us to share, and that was exciting to get up and see the bicycle sitting by the Christmas tree. So I really, really loved all those memories. And even down to the Dale saying about his tradition for the men to go hunting, that's still really common in the mountains of Appalachia. There's a lot of people that only hunt on that one day because that's just part of their tradition. They're not like Matt, and they don't go other times, throughout the whatever season it is, if it's deer season or squirrel season or whatever, turkey season in the spring. Maybe they don't do any of that, but they just go hunting on that Thanksgiving. And for a lot of them, it's probably more just the camaraderie of being with your uncles and your grandpas, or whoever it is, your father, just getting to go out and be together while the women make that delicious meal. I love those memories and love that connection to family. What the chapter, or the 2 chapters that we read today, started out talking about the chickens. If you've ever had chickens, or maybe you had them when you were growing up, varmints, all kinds of varmints that's their goal in life, is to attack your chickens. And a weasel, like what Dale thought got all of his at once, all of his families, those are really deadly to chickens. They can just do so much damage. But other things can too. Of course, neighborhood dogs and stray dogs, and even your own dog if it likes chickens. But then possums and raccoons, that's mostly what we've had trouble trying to get inside ours and get the chickens, would be raccoons or possums. Over the years, those would be the 2 things. And then chickens also just get sick and things like that. But it is a constant battle, things wanting to eat your chickens for sure. I like the part, I'm going to go back and read it, I think, if I can find it. I really like the part that Dale was talking about the difference in the when you think about today, so much of our modern lives are took up by our devices, our TVs, all those things. And of course here I am on YouTube, so I'm not knocking that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. But there is something missing from you if you think back to those times with Dale. Now, I grew up with the TV, and we sat around and watched the TV together. Granny and Pap did, and we have a TV in our house, so I'm not saying any of that is wrong or anything like that. But it does make you kind of long for those days when there was, or maybe even back to when I was a girl and there was only 3 channels. So a lot of times there was, or 2 channels, most of the time 3 if you were lucky. A lot of times there wasn't nothing on you wanted to watch anyway. So it was easy to like he said, read a book, to, Granny crocheting, or maybe I was, making something. I used to embroidery. Maybe I was doing that. Maybe Paul and Pap was playing the guitar. Steve liked to listen to music. Maybe he was in the back room listening to music. So all those things, it just seems like the TV and today our devices. Corey actually, says, and it's true in one way, even though I'm a YouTuber, but she calls her phone the portal to hell, because it almost is, because there's so much bad stuff on the internet. But then there is good stuff like this. We're getting to be together and celebrate and talk about Dale's wonderful things. But there is some, like a longing in me that I think about those times that Dale was, how he described his family and had that extra time to do the things they wanted to do. It was just a different world, though. It's a different world than what we live in today. It's just a different time and a different world. The bare feet he was talking about, I don't go barefooted today, but I sure did when I was a girl. And me and Paul both, we got our feet real tough by the end of the summer, and got stung a lot stepping on honeybees, and the cuts and the nails and all those kind of things. I've got a good, like a check mark scar on one of my toes from stepping on a tin can going barefooted when I was real little. And I still remember how Granny tied it up and took care of it. So, but I don't go barefooted today. Now, recently, people's been telling me, and one of the subscribers here on YouTube, and then some other people that I know, about how healthy it is to go barefooted, and like, you're getting connected to the earth, and it's supposed to be good for your health and all those kind of things. So I need to try to do that. For me, it's not so much my feet. I know from experience from being a kid, my feet will get tough eventually if I go barefooted. But for me, I don't like for my feet to be dirty. I don't like for my feet to be dirty. So I don't like to step, like him talking about stepping in the cow pile. I don't even like walking across the grass and getting dirty if it's wet and getting that all. Now, when I was a kid, it didn't bother me a bit, but today I don't like to get my feet dirty. But I have said that I'm going to try to do that and see if it improves my health. Now, the 484 watermelons. For me, I love watermelons. I've already eaten watermelon today. I had to buy it, but oh my goodness, could I have eaten that many watermelons though? I don't think so. I would have really been, I eat it every day, but I would have really been eating it around the clock if I tried to eat all the ones that Dale's farm produced that year. But that's amazing. I wish I could produce. I wouldn't plant 484, but I wish I could, grow enough that would hold me. But the thing about watermelons is they're not like pumpkins. They won't last through the winter. So maybe I grow enough. Maybe I do. But mine are, all of ours that we grow are small. No big ones like the ones I'm sure Dale's family grew. But that's amazing, 484 watermelons. And that he was 9 years old and took care of them. That's amazing too. The part that I wanted to read wasn't actually about the family. I remembered it was about all the things they had to do, all those chores and all that. Granny told me one time, me and her and Pap were talking about the old days and when they were young, and Granny said you had to get water. They didn't have running water. You had to get water for everything you did, whether you was just drinking it, taking a bath, washing clothes, cooking, washing dishes, all that. So somebody always had to be getting water. You had to have wood, not just because it was cold. You could think, well, okay, it's summertime, we don't need no wood, we'll wait and do that in the wintertime. No, you had to cook with wood, so you still had to get wood. So she said between getting wood, getting water, and making sure you had enough food to eat, and that's whether you were, growing a garden this time of the year, or maybe putting up at harvest time, putting up stuff, maybe foraging in the woods, all those kind of things. She said you just didn't have time for meanness. You didn't have time to get into any meanness. It took all your time just to survive. Well, today there's a lot of meanness, like we were talking about a moment ago. So sometimes I wonder if we had to depend on ourselves again to get our food and to get our water and to, have a fire for everything, get our wood. Maybe there'd be less meanness in the world. I don't know. But the part that when he was talking about all that, the part I wanted to read was, he says, life on the farm, like all of life, was a mixture of good and bad, but I think as the years have gone by, we have all tended to shove the bad to the back shelf and finally remember the good. I think that is as it should be. Now, we're all like, or I'm like that, certainly. I look back on something and I don't remember the bad. I just remember the good. And they say put on rose-colored glasses. I know I'm like that when I look backwards and look back at the past. Maybe I could be accused of being like that when I look at the whole of Appalachia today. But someone, during our loss of Miss Cindy, someone left a comment, really nice comment, but in that somehow they said that. They said, and as time goes by, you won't remember the bad stuff. Like, they weren't insinuating Miss Cindy was bad, but like the hard stuff that we went through. You won't remember that. You'll just remember all the good stuff. You'll remember, her laugh and memories, good memories and all that. So I think Dale's very wise in saying that. And he's also very wise in the fact that all that kind of ties together, those memories. So certainly life on his farm when he was a boy was tough. We've all read the book together. We see when they didn't have much and all that. But he has such fond memories looking back at it. And I think one of the keys is I'm a big proponent of Appalachia, but also a big proponent of family. So that if you have that tight family unit, I just think the world would be a better place if we all had a family. Now, I know if you're an individual and your family wasn't like that, there's just not much you can do about it. I know those tough situations exist, and I'm so sorry for them. But I wish that was something as a whole world we could strive for, having those families. Like if that was an important, just like going to college is important. It's important if you have a family. If you want to have a happy life, try your best to have a family. Be a good, whether it's a husband, wife, father, mother, sister, brother, be good. Try to be your best so your family will be good. And like I said, I know that doesn't happen. I'm very, very blessed that I grew up in a wonderful family and I have a wonderful family. But I think this part of Dale's book, the whole book, but this part especially really speaks to me about family and the importance of that. And it's just interesting to read too. This is just really a great book. Of course, that's why I picked it to read to you. I hope that you've been enjoying it as much as I have. Hope you enjoyed this part. Leave a comment and tell me the parts that jumped out at you, things it reminded you of, pricked your memory, made you remember maybe grandpa or grandma or when you were young or whatever it was. And as always, you got to drop back by next Friday to see what happens next. We're getting close to the end, but we've still got probably at least 2 more readings, so be sure to drop back by next Friday.